right. Hey, everyone. Thanks so much for joining in today. Super excited for our third session of the Pipeline Solutions Staffing Series. Today, we are chatting with Zach Colman from Creatitive. Zach has experience with a wide range of athletes and athletic-driven brands, helping them find their why through brand identity and digital experiences, including MLB's Phil Koch, NFL's Mike Kafka, Robert Turbin, and corporate brands such as the Phoenix Suns, Serfas, Crunch Fitness, and the Pro Football Retired Players Association. Based in Arizona, his companies focus on mindset around his athletics and branding background to help athletic-driven brands find their why, brand themselves, increase their value to their audiences, and help sports and athletic corporations increase their revenue by setting marketing goals that focus around community rather than numbers. So we're super excited to have you, Zach, and can't wait to see what you got here.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. That's a long bio. I hope everyone got all
It's all good. We got time. It's all good. It's good for
Yeah,
everyone to understand,
yeah, we'll get into it. Well,
where you're
as
coming
you
from.
said, my name is Zach Colman. I'm a TEDx speaker, founder, and strategist here at Creative, which is a grit and motivation focused firm that helps people stay mentally fit through development, education, and implementation of my branding principles: connection, contribution, and confidence. It's kind of funny because, hint, hint, those are also my values. Um, As Tessa stated, we have worked with multiple sizes of companies within the sports and athletic niche. Um, More so, we've worked with Crunch on an organizational level through branding, SEO content, web development, brand development. Questions can always come at the end if needed. But we've also worked with a lot of boutique studios as well. We work with a lot of small to medium sized locations, 1 to 2 locations, and the 3 to 7, for example, that are in the boutique. Help them with their experiences and their digital experiences through Google, warm marketing, with a hint of that community building in there as well. And my objective for what I'm trying to do with my business is really just help those athletic driven brands find their why through those brand and digital experiences. Now, let's just get key into this webinar here. So, the key takeaways I want everyone to take away from this webinar really is, one, I want to talk through value creation. I want to give people an understanding of that value creation. A majority of you may already have values. And so this system here is going to not just help you how to create your values if you haven't had any already, but it will also help you look interior into what you already have and how you can take your values and either upgrade them, rearrange them based off of your culture, and or improve your hiring. Part two, we'll kind of go through some valuable type questions for hiring and existing employees to try to find those right people that match the behavior of the values that you're providing. And number three, we will kind of go through a worksheet where we will, figure out questions on the hiring that you are going to do within your studio based off of behaviors. And I think that that's going to be a key word going through this whole webinar here is your behaviors and what you're going to kind of work through as you understand the culture and the values that you're trying to implement. Now, you know, wouldn't we all love to just jump on those calls, look at those resumes, have a conversation, and let our gut build that connection and hire the right people for the right positions, or know that the people we hire really enjoy those passions for the community and the business that we're trying to grow as leadership? I was there. I remember feeling overwhelmed by the number of people I had to bring on to fill specific roles, only to have them go show or move on after a month because they just didn't follow that same passion or work ethic that I did for my brand. I focused more on having people follow checklist items, and that really took me out of my day to day of trying to work on those profit generating type tasks. I was constantly burnt out. I was hiring, firing on a constant basis. This is not to say we're perfect. Not everyone's going to match our vision. As leaders, we are trying to guide ourselves towards the type of people that match our vision, our goals for what we want to establish as leaders. Around 10 years ago, my last corporate job that I was working at, I was working at Pearson Education as an art director. And you might know of them. They have the little penguin on the side of their books that they usually put out for children, but they do a lot more than that. And, I had the privilege of having 3 directors within a 2-year period. I called this experience in my life Goldilocks experience. I went from having a great director to a mediocre director to a bad director. And this made me realize that us as people can have a dream career and a dream job, but not always at the same time. Towards the end of my venture with Pearson, I realized that I didn't align with them and it wasn't my dream job. But if I would have had that original director, the good director, the culture and the values that he was implementing, I may have stayed. It could have been my dream job. But all this happens for a reason. And if it weren't for that, I wouldn't have built what I have now. I wouldn't have all those experiences that allowed me to realize that I was actually misaligned with their values and mine. Now, the first part of this webinar is kind of going over your core values. And I would love to kind of go over this with people. There's a worksheet provided, and a lot of you may already have value views. Some of you may not, but the goal is somewhat the same, trying to find terminology that really matches where you are at in business and where you would like to go in business so that you can start hiring the right people, market the right way, et cetera, et cetera. As you can see on the screen here, our 4 values are communication, connection, contribution, and confidence. And throughout this workshop / webinar today, I'm going to kind of go through and use a basic value that will help you kind of get an understanding of how this can work so that you can take the worksheet that's provided, you can go with your team, you can work on it. I'd love to do that with you, but honestly, you're the only one that knows your organization and your culture. You're the only one that has your own personal brands that could grow something. But here's a list, kind of a cheat sheet that you can utilize. And the couple things that I kind of want to take into note as you're kind of going through and building your values is there are going to be timeless and guided type values. And these are really fundamental principles that we all kind of live by, right? You have like innovation, customer focus, integrity, which we'll kind of utilize today because it's probably the easiest one that we all try to utilize. And these principles provide a constant framework for decision making and the behavior across the organization. Now, you also have the sacro portion of this, and these are how you kind of utilize these values so that you don't compromise in the short term for short-term gains. And let's say, for example, if you want to cut corners on saving on cost, if you have the term in the core value of integrity, that will help you dictate that the company will maintain ethical business practices. For me, for instance, going back to the hiring process, our value of connection really provides a theme that no matter what, if we are going to hire someone, we will not ghost anyone that doesn't make it, right? We will still email them. We will let them know that they can, go on and sign up for another interview in the future. And we let them know, and we don't just ghost them so they don't feel like just another cog on the wheel. Now, this next portion here is kind of the fun part. And like I said earlier, you're all going to have your own organizations. You're all going to have your own culture. And a whole different webinar can go behind the whole premise of starting with your personal values as an owner. But as boutique studio owners, I take it you guys are at the point where you have at least 2 to 3 employees. And if you are, then you don't really have to leverage your personal values. You can integrate them a little bit, but this is going to be more so on how you can take your existing values and find them yourself. The funny thing is that these values and these core values are not selected. Once you already have kind of a couple people on staff, and you may have them for years, you may have 3 to 4, 6 to 8, whatever it may be, but they're more so discovered in the people that are currently in your organization. They already exist. And so the point of this portion of the webinar is for you to kind of take this sheet and look at your team internally. And the reason we don't have, bad employees compared to good employees or favorite employees is because I would hope that you kind of already gotten rid of some of your bad employees, due to that integrity aspect. But this isn't really playing favorites. It's really just writing down the names of the people inside of your organization and why they're you consider them a great employee. What are the types of behaviors that they do? What are the attributes that they have? Same with your least favorite employees. Now, you have 3 different ways that you can kind of go about this when you're kind of understanding these values. One, we want our need in the future for the vision of what you're trying to grow. For instance, integrity was one that I originally had, and as I grew and evolved, that kind of separated into contribution and connection. They both have different types of traits that I want to leverage within what I'm doing, and so those were growing values that I created. You have the permission to play values. And these are really just minimum standards everyone has. Like I said, you have integrity. That's probably one of the favorite that most people use. Like, you would not hire somebody if they didn't have any sort of integrity. And then lastly, you have accidental values, common characteristics that are not truly core to the organization. They may be a little bit more superficial. So I'm just going to kind of give you an example here, since we're going to kind of run through this webinar to help you kind of put this out into your own words, right? If I were to have John Doe, for instance, and I were to talk about integrity, right? And a good example would be, you know, he really strives to be honest in all of the dealings that he does, if it be with a member, if it be with another internal employee. And how is that integrity in action? How is that value in action, right? This pushes the team to go beyond that basic honesty. It encourages proactively disclosing potential conflicts of interests or requirements, right? And so that's kind of the main way that you can kind of nail down the types of people and their attributes, to go back to that cheat sheet and say, how can we evolve our values? How do we find the types of behaviors and the types of values that are already somewhat ingrained in our facility? Like I said, we aren't going to go through this worksheet too much more, but the important thing that I want you all to understand is that the values that you develop will dictate not just your team's behavior, but your behavior. That's why I always say go back to your personal values first. But this behavior will help lead your team by leading by example, and it will help guide behaviors around your team moving forward. Now, how can we really dictate that human behavior to our hiring processes? How do we know candidates match those values with just having those 1 or 2 interviews? I think it's one of the biggest pains I have when I'm diving through, 5 or 6 people that I think would be great fits, right? Well, I actually had this conversation with my cousin a few months back, and I had a phone call with her last week because I'm like, this is really going to hit, and I really want to utilize this experience for this webinar I have coming up. But a couple months I had a conversation with her, and she was telling me about this story where she used to work at a studio. And she actually was telling me about the culture and how she had to quit that studio. She admitted to me that when she first started and she went in, she talked a lot with management about improving processes, improving programming. And a funny thing was that she did not notice was that while she was going through this and trying to do this, that her coworkers actually felt she was intrusive, giving them more work. This is actually what led her to feel unvalued, so she quit. There's always more to the story than that. I wasn't her, I wasn't there. But the one thing that I did hear is the culture wasn't a fit. If that studio had just vetted its team around a set of principles or values, they could have guided a set of behaviors around those values, an aligned vision. People may have wanted to help, improve, evolve that studio. I say this because this story shows you how we have more control over our hiring than we think we do. One thing that I learned from about my cousin's experience, when she got hired, she was telling me how excited she was. The manager actually told her, you can come in, you can improve process. She was going to do it for free. She was shocked when she started to go in. Other managers wouldn't allow her to. Other people were upset because the culture wasn't living up to those same values. This wasn't necessarily the employee's fault, right? It was the leadership's. None of the management that was doing the hiring was taking that hiring process seriously. None of them were behaving or living true to those values, even down to the questions that they were asking during the interview process. Now, you'll see this next sheet up on the board, also part of the handout that you have that I recommend you taking and you doing with your internal team or whoever's doing your hiring processes. But, really finding those behavioral answers to a value can help guide the direction of the things that are going to happen due to situations within the culture of your studio. If you look here, you'll see 5 basic questions on the screen. These are very basic. On your sheet, you have plenty more that I put on there that you would start to ask during an interview process. A good example from what's on the screen here is you have what makes you stuck, very common, very simple. And, a behavior behind that and something that I would look at for my value term of confidence would be you're willing to get unstuck without resistance. You're willing to look at a failure and create a positive out of that situation. Now, some examples you can do here to kind of come up with certain types of behaviors, and you're all going to come up with your own because you're all going to have different situations that help dictate those types of behaviors, right? Is taking all 5 of these and coming up with a nice question around that particular behavior. Describe a situation where you had to make a difficult decision that involved ethical consideration. How did you approach that situation? And what factors did you consider in making your decision? This actually probes the candidate into handling ethical dilemmas and prioritizing that word of integrity. See how the value term now relates to the question and the behavior of the individual. Another good question could be something along the lines of, in a previous role, can you share an instance where you had to disclose a mistake you made? How did you handle the situation and what were the consequences? I love this one because this is a question that you can really test the boundaries of this kind of core value, right? Integrity. It really assess their ability to hold themselves accountable and own their mistakes with actually being and having integrity during the answer itself. Now, in the case of my cousin and her experience, what did I learn? Well, something that I see from a lot of the prospects and even clients that come into our door is that they just used them as words. They just got random words, threw them on a sheet, and that was it, just like her past studio. If they were to just live by those values, help dictate and guide around those behaviors, things may have been a little bit better. Now, we want to kind of dictate the behaviors around these questions, right? You come up with the questions and then you kind of dictate, all right, what are the behaviors? And then you put them all together. Employee retention, it's not just an operations play, it's a branding play. The very last thing my cousin told me on that call was, "Oh yeah, I've known like 6 or 7 people that have dropped being a member there because the employees just weren't nice. They weren't helpful." The culture actually dictated membership retention as well as employee retention. So it's how people feel about your messaging and visuals, but it's also about how your employees feel about you, about the organization as a whole. And that's branding. I was at a point in my business where I was just hiring people to follow tasks, and that was no longer working for me. I had to hire people who shared my aspirations and goals and wanted to follow a common vision. These values are something that I didn't feel like I needed. So I thought, I build brand strategies that help clients be seen in the way they want to be seen, but I didn't realize I needed my team to follow a similar vision. Our core values as leaders start with us, our personal brand, which defines who we are, will guide how we hire, manage, and grow. They form behaviors. Most importantly, we need to know how our team and prospective employees slash 1099s perceive and act upon those behaviors. They don't need to be your best friends, but building a connection with them and sharing similar values will help you and them achieve the vision you want for your studio. Did you know that as of 2024, around 33% of studios worldwide have such bad culture that they spend upwards of 37, if not more, dollars a year on continually recruiting new talent? The study by Forbes also indicates that many workers seek a deeper connection to their work overall. They want to know their contributions make a difference in helping their workplace achieve its mission and vision. And at the same time, they uphold specific values that they hope that brand shares. I realized that growing my business to where I wanted it to go meant it couldn't stay where it was at. I lost my value of confidence. I was stuck behind a computer, dictating everything I did. And I had to realize that my team wasn't just a number on a computer screen. For me to go where I wanted to go, I needed vision. I needed direction. I needed to bring back and live that value of confidence. Now, it doesn't matter if these are your personal your personal values. It doesn't matter if they're your brand values. It doesn't even matter if you work for a franchise and they give you a set of values. The goal is to have values that you and your team live by. Behaviors are guided by those values. What was my experience? I can count on one hand how many employees I lost to not fitting my values. Before I started implementing my values, I had this one employee. She was pretty great. Sometimes I think about even trying to bring her back into the organization. But then I remember she didn't have that value of confidence. What did she have instead? She had ego. This ego actually prevented her from seeing and adapting the change and growth that we were trying to achieve in the business, because she was unable to see past that ego, see past those small failures to achieve that confidence. So what did I do? I slowly started to restore that confidence and ensure that every staff member valued it through not just the external messaging and branding, but the operations, the internal experiences we provided. We started to behave within the value of confidence, and I started to hire based off those behaviors I saw within. Something that we do on a normal basis, just to kind of give you an idea and an example here, is we have our Monday meetings every Monday. And of course, and when we're doing those meetings, what we actually do is we actually have a spot on there to talk about everyone's failures from the week prior. They don't have to be huge failures. I try to look at failure as a positive, a positive step forward towards building confidence. We take that failure and we talk to the team about it. How can we improve? How can we change? How can we build you more confidence based off of that failure? Now, what that means for me is definitely going to differ for what it means to you. But the goal is to develop and implement guided words dictated to what you want your studio to feel, act, say. Sounds like external branding, right? Well, very similar. It's all about that behavior. Now, going into this final part of the worksheet, it's time to kind of put it all together. Put all of your values together, add a behavior that you would want to be related, and tailor a specific question. Your sheet should have more spots than this, but I recommend, like I said at the beginning, trying to stick to 3 to 5 values. Put your values down, put your behaviors, and then you put a specific question based off of those actions, kind of like we talked about on the last sheet. Tailor those questions. Let me give you kind of an example here for someone like yourself. If we wanted to utilize the integrity is part of our values, and find a behavior around that. We could do something along the lines of always prioritize client safety and well-being above personal gain. That could be a behavior. Now, for a question around that behavior, you could do something along the lines of describe a situation where you had to prioritize the safety of someone else, even if it meant inconveniencing you. How did you handle the situation? And what was that outcome? Now, the beauty with this type of workshop, this type of webinar, is it's actually going to take you to a place where you can start thinking more strategically. This is strategy in a nutshell, is being able to have you sit down and think about those deeper questions that can help move the needle faster. You could potentially save $37,000 a year by just creating these types of interview questions, not just hiring on productivity, but also hiring on the values and the behaviors of the people, so that you can start building an ecosystem of behaviors for what you want your organization to feel and see. So I'll say this as we wrap up and head into any questions. Values aren't just a couple of words written down on a piece of paper. They guide the vision and the team around the communication that you want to display. And the goal of this webinar wasn't necessarily just about hiring people. It's a guide that helps that connection between you, your team, and the vision that you want for your studio so that you can start hiring the right people. And that's it. That's where we will leave it off to Q&A.
So awesome, Zach. Thank you. That was great. What's so funny about that is it's so easy to get lost in asking very kind of um, structured questions, right, in an interview, or questions that you've always asked that really don't provide those answers, that don't align with really the core values of your studio. So I love this because it's not just, to your point, if we look at that, the cheat sheet, and we can pick out 5 words that kind of sound great, and even put them up on the wall, but how do we actually get those behaviors to come through? And the question side of it is really a lens into that, just understanding how people actually um, act, right? Like that's the
Yeah.
first clue. Is you can never, obviously you can never know for sure. People might say something and do something else, but of course, um, I think if that's the case, you tend to sniff that out a little bit quicker than if you had never asked the question at all. So
Yeah, I
yeah,
think
I really
it's
appreciate
interesting that
this.
I think it's interesting that you say that because and I think that's the kind of the goal of some of these questions here is it's not just the normal, like, hey, have you ever left a previous job before? Anyone could lie on that, right? But when you dictate around behaviors, you will see a theme coming up around the kinds of answers that they alliterate. Um,
Right.
take us for example with the terminology of communication. Communication is one. I mean, I'm a communications and marketing firm at heart, right? So it doesn't just work for my clients, but it works for us. I'm very big on partnerships and working through, very similar to this webinar. And so I ask every single person we want to hire something along the lines of, have you ever had a client come to you and request changes? Something that happens very common in our industry that doesn't necessarily fit with the overall campaign of what we're trying to do. What did you do about it?
Right.
They're not going to be able to necessarily lie about, oh, like I was nice and I did the changes. Okay, well, that's not what I wanted to hear. Like that
Right.
doesn't
Yeah.
show that
Yeah.
you know how to communicate. So it's actually very easy for you to move away from those those fake answers from people and then you'll realize at the end that they don't have integrity, and because they're
Yeah.
lying about everything. But back
Yeah.
to what you asked here, you asked about professionalism. I would take that as a long living. It's like a non-negotiable value, right? Those are the ones that
Mhm.
are kind of a given because I think that we all want to have professionalism in our workplace.
Right.
So
Yeah.
keeping professionalism at the very head of, hey, this is a non-negotiable, just like integrity. If
Hmm.
someone comes on a call, for instance, and and you're like, hey, have you ever embezzled or stole money from your passing? They're not going to say yes, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Of course.
but that's part of integrity. You would never hire anyone who stole, right? So as the same with professionalism, but you can probably feel out professionalism a little bit more. No one's gonna say, "Oh yeah, my
Yeah.
last job, I just didn't show up for 4 days, and then I
Right.
told them I was sick after," right? So those ones are more guided in everything that you would want to do from a top level. And that's why I mentioned integrity as being part of our past main ones, because it was more of a surface level. Now, trying to
Yeah.
dive in deeper and figure out, okay, connection. I mean, if you're down for contribution, in any format, you're most likely have integrity. You're not going to
Yeah.
someone who's not integrity, doesn't have integrity, isn't going to have contribution, right? But um,
Yeah.
yeah, I just thought that
Absolutely.
it's what you're saying is 100%. 100% true. I think that you always have to focus on profession. You always have to focus on work ethic. You always have to focus on productivity. And I actually have another sheet that can kind of combine those two if necessary. I just didn't have enough time to throw it in this presentation. But um, values are probably going to be one of the big things as you grow that you're going to be able to control more than work ethic, right?
Yeah,
So uh,
absolutely.
I think that studios, especially studios, are at that phase of consistency and growth. Um, Starting to build culture now before it gets too out of hand, I think
Mhm.
is something that people don't feel like they need, but it's such a superpower.
Absolutely. And that actually brings up, there's a couple questions in the chat here that I'll just read out. But one is essentially your thoughts around, you know, um, what to do when if you feel like that culture is starting to slip, right? So if you're at the point where to what you're saying, let's say we're getting into that multi-location type of growth. You have a great culture at Studio One, maybe a great culture at Studio Two, and now we're going, 3 to 5 or to 7 to 10. How do we make sure that that doesn't get diluted across all of those
Yeah,
channels?
that's a tough one because it could come down to there's a lot of different answers it could come up with there. One, maybe those I would think first see are these values surface level? Are they really something that's holding these places together or not? You could have evolved, you could have changed as a person, so could the way you want the studio. So back to part one of this webinar is maybe you have to relook at your values. Um, I
Mm,
always think of it as a nice way to do it. Is kind of look at your personal values. Like I said earlier, like what kind of things can you do in your life to find those values? Number two, which is more so realistic, when you have 7 to 10 locations, for instance, you have managers of each location or leadership role. If 9 out of that 10 are doing it right, and one of them is doing it wrong, uh, then I would say it comes down to whoever's in that role. Whoever's in that role, either they're doing very similar to what I said happened to my cousin, where
right.
leadership
Yeah.
wasn't necessarily taking those values seriously. So it may take a quarterly retreat or a monthly management meeting to sit down and talk to that particular manager and say, hey, why aren't these values being lived by? Are you living by these values? Like, are these
Yeah.
things that you still believe in? Or you can really honestly go back down to that sheet I provided, at number 3, and just go off of the leadership of each location, right? Go off of, all right,
Right.
what do I like about these four? What do I and what do I not like? Put them in a column and kind of look at the behaviors associated with those. And then that can actually
Mhm.
help you probably evolve those values even more.
Yeah. I love that. It's a really great point because that also works for, even if we're talking about a single location, but maybe a remote ownership or something like that. Just anyone that you might have those personal values, but they're not physically in that space anymore. How do you imbue those things to
That one's
your
hard.
leaders,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
have them, kind of set that tone.
That one's an interesting one because I've probably very similar to you. I've seen a lot of leadership roles, go to be more of like the owner and just sit back and have management team and they do like a virtual call every
Mm-hmm.
month or 2 months. And there's nothing wrong with that. But what I would say is, as a business owner, values are your responsibility, leadership as well. They're kind of the visionary, and the business owner is the visionary at heart. So leading by example may be something that he or she needs to start putting into account. Like, maybe I do need to once a month, instead of having a virtual call, I need to lead by example and I need to set up a quarterly retreat, sit down with these people, have a day where we can kind of go through these values and work these out together. Maybe something that they need to put in to show that they're actually also living by those values, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And absolutely, because the check-ins, it's hard to replicate that in person, kind of energy and what that brings to a team and how that can precipitate through the culture and through the values and seeing it happen. And actually, one thing that you also mentioned that came up, that someone mentioned, is your example of your weekly call using failure as a positive step forward and essentially celebrating it, right? Not necessarily
Hmm.
like confetti, but in the same way, it's not keeping it in the dark and instead
Hmm.
putting a light on it, which then builds confidence because now every week people, if you had new team members, they're less afraid to share what went wrong because they know that it's essentially a safe space to do that because we're going to work through it together. And as we work through it together, that's going to build that confidence. So I think, that's a great example. But just generally speaking, I think what could be very beneficial, for the owners, operators on the call, and for people in the boutique industry is thinking of those ways that we can um, celebrate the behaviors that are the embodiment of the values that we want,
Hmm.
right? So
Hmm.
I don't know that we necessarily do that enough, but if it's accountability, maybe that means that there's a shout out for the person that's picking up the extra shifts all month because everyone's sick with walking pneumonia, which is very common here right now. And everyone's going down.
Yeah, everyone's getting it here too.
Every other week someone's going down, and so if one of our core values is trustworthiness or accountability, then are we celebrating when someone's actually doing that and not just saying it, but shouting out those people that are imbuing those behaviors. So I think that's actually kind of a really tactical kind of takeaway that we can use even immediately in like the next weekly meeting is celebrating the behaviors that are really the forefront of the values at the core of them.
Mhm. And that's what I love about these webinars and learning from other leadership because none of us are perfect, right? So what you just said there, I'm looking at it and I'm like, man, this is a great idea. Embodying that, finding a
Yeah.
way to embody those behaviors into the internal team. Um, every Monday and celebrating those people that are going above and beyond and not just, hey, I wrote an extra checklist item on here and I got another thing of
Right.
work done. But maybe they, yeah, took another shift. Maybe they helped someone with a training session when someone else couldn't do it because they were sick.
Yeah.
Maybe you have a daycare center provided, I think, a good example because my cousin, she was part of the daycare center, right? And it was a very similar kind of situation there where the employees felt very resistant towards her wanting to come in. Leadership wanted it, but she didn't. So being able to promote that to the whole team every Monday, I think that's a good idea. I'm stealing that one
Right.
from you.
Yeah, go for it. Steal away. Because to that example, really, had leadership celebrated even just, a small step that she had taken with making something more consistent in the process or something like that in that for those first 2 weeks or, however long that first month, it does send a signal to the team that this is what we're valuing. And so it can be subtle, but if leadership is celebrating that, then it is sending that message of no, we value this, we want this to happen. And so I do think that that's part of the step that needs to happen, to make sure that people understand um, that the behaviors are being noticed and being recognized and are being driven by those values that the leadership team wants to celebrate.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Thanks for having me on. If anyone else has any more questions, you do have the handout. They're more than welcome to email me. Um, I'd always love for, anyone who has any questions for this stuff, they can always DM me. And as you go through these topics with your team, I just want everyone to know that, brand development has more stages than just value creation. Value creation is really just kind of a step one in kind of a brand strategy type environment. You have other strategies that you can entail. And us in particular, value creation is step one. We kind of go in and we dive into audience and offer development as well during that phase. And then in stage two is when we kind of come in and take all that information and develop the visuals and the messaging and that kind of communication. So if anybody who's on here is at a point where, they know that they're at a point where that brand needs to have some separation or they're in a growth cycle and need to build some of that consistency, I'm going to put a link in the comment right here for anyone who wants to go through and set up a call with me is more than welcome to. I'm also going to share just the download as well. They're more than welcome to go in here and just download this again if they want the more guidance on the direction. They're more than welcome to not just take the sheet, but they're more than welcome to watch through the little series I have here with this particular session, and they can go through the workshop with me. And that's free, of course. They just need to download it and they'll get the videos related to helping them set through that process.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, those are in the link, or those links are in the chat for everyone, and they should be included in the recording as well. So thank you so much, Zach. Really appreciate your time, and it's great to have you.
Thank you. I really do appreciate you.